So welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time on this beautiful afternoon for coming to this webinar on wood pellets. We are going to be sharing information about the proposed wood pellet project. We're going to have a discussion to get participants' thoughts on how to fight this project, their capacity and potential partners. Our panelists today are Gary Hughes of Biofuels Watch and Shay Wolf of the Center for Biological Diversity. And Gary will give us an overview of the project, who is Golden State Natural Resources, some thoughts about and information about project financing. And he's going to put the wood pellet industry into context. Shay will go over some of the threats from this project and the next steps in fighting the project. And then we're going to open it up for discussion. We will have questions and hopefully bring some of your insights into how to fight this project. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Gary Hughes of Biofuels Watch.
All right, thank you, Janet. Thank you everyone for showing up. Thank you to Sunflower Alliance for making this possible. I have a short selection of slides to share to get us started. As Janet has suggested, I'm going to try to cover some nuts and bolts about Golden State Natural Resources, a little bit about the financing of the project, a little bit about the context, and then actually I conferred with Janet and Shay, and I have just a little bit of information to share about the equity issues around the actual labor conditions in the woods in our state right now. So my name's Gary Hughes. I work now in a position that we call America's Program Coordinator for Biofuel Watch. I have a portfolio of work in California, and then a fair amount of work internationally, especially with partners in Latin America and specifically in Chile on the plantation forestry model. You know, Biofuel Watch, in all senses of the word, is a tiny civil society organization, but we're international in scope, and we have a really strong focus on the human rights and social harms and environmental damage coming from bioenergy. I want to note that our fiscal sponsor here in the state is in the United States, is Global Justice Ecology Project, GJEP, one of the founding organizations of Climate Justice Alliance. Really proud to work with GJEP. So anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and get right into the nuts and bolts and the deep aspects of what Golden State Natural Resources is, this project that they've put on the table. This map is from their own information. I think it's a really good reference point. So the point of GSNR is to site and construct 2 new wood pellet manufacturing facilities, one each in Tuolumne and Lassen counties. They have a pretty extensive feedstock sourcing area anticipated for each one of these plants, pulling feedstock from public and private lands. Their stated goal right now is to get this up and running and to be manufacturing 1 million tons of wood pellets a year. This is a really significant amount of wood pellets. It's really large. Some of the biggest plants burning wood pellets to generate electricity can be burning 6 or 7 million tons a year. So we're talking about a huge percentage of some of these biggest plants from one project. The facility that they're proposing to build in Lassen County would actually be one of the largest wood pellet manufacturing facilities in the world up on the Modoc Plateau. So once the pellets are manufactured, the idea is to ship them by rail to port options in the San Francisco Bay Area, which could be Stockton, but we've got a lot more indications that they're looking at the Levine terminal in Richmond, which has been the site of a very important and recent climate justice victory to bring an end to the export of dirty coal and petcoke through that terminal. But right now, the idea of Golden State Natural Resources is to export wood pellets two global markets that are increasingly turning to burning biomass as a substitute for coal. And this is the context that we're going to touch on again with these slides. Just really quickly here, this is Golden State Natural Resources' own words. This is from like a little pamphlet that they put together to advertise a project where they're really, explicit about building two new wood pellet manufacturing facilities and how they're looking at the ports in Richmond or Stockton. So it's this, still a lot to be determined about this project. So let's talk about, who or what is Golden State Natural Resources. And this is one of the takeaways we're hoping people will have from this in order to have a good vocabulary and know who it is that's proposing this. So the Rural County Representatives of California is actually a not-for-profit organization that is comprised of some 40 rural counties in the state. And then the Rural County Representatives of California has a whole series of what they call affiliated entities, and two of them are directly related to this project. One is called the Golden State Finance Authority, which, interestingly enough, the Golden State Finance Authority is also the entity that has taken on responsibilities as the lead agency on the California Environmental Quality Act review. So the Golden State Natural Resources Board then has 5 members on it, and it's made up then of supervisors who are the representatives of their counties to the Rural County Representatives of California. And then for different reasons, they have been nominated and assigned to the board of directors for the Golden State Natural Resources. There's a supervisor from Modoc County, from Inyo County, from Butte, from Siskiyou, and then notoriously recently, just at the end of January, a supervisor from Humboldt County joined the board of Golden State Natural Resources. Let's see if I can advance my slides again here. Just really quickly then, where we're at with things is that it was Janet who really kind of alerted me to what was going on back in September even with the wood pellet export. And I started really digging around, spending quite a bit of time to learn more about Golden State Natural Resources. And I started tracking them very closely. And then we noticed suddenly after the Thanksgiving break in November that they had opened the scoping on the California Environmental Quality Act review of the project. And we got a great response from a whole bunch of different folks, Center for Biological Diversity, Partnership for Policy Integrity, also bigger groups on working on these issues at a national and international level actually weighed in, like Natural Resources Defense Council, really, really important. We got more than 30 groups to sign on one of our letters. We'll talk about that more. We're waiting for the release of the draft environmental impact report. That'll be a chance for more organizing. But what we've learned in looking really closely at what's going on with Golden State Natural Resources is that though they speak in code and they're very opaque about it, they do have open board meetings. They have made it really clear that they're facing a financial close / investment decision date this year. And so there's something up with the finances around this, for better or worse. We really think that we have a great opportunity to affect this project if we can slow it down because of the tight nature, but also money talks. Money can make a lot of things happen. So we're nervous about this. And so what we see happening then is that Golden State Natural Resources is really trying to rub shoulders with the biggest players in the global wood pellet industry. Now, some of the backstory on the finances is we know that the Golden State Finance Authority actually made a $10 million loan to Golden State Natural Resources to initially capitalize the project, which does raise questions of conflict of interest because Golden State Finance Authority is acting as the lead agency for the environmental review of this project. So I guess there's a governance question there that we'll want to continue exploring. Though we need to do more research on it, we've identified the possibility for tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars for feedstock harvest and logging and forest treatments that could be available in the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act is from my assessment, an energy bill, because so many of what's qualified as climate actually very questionable. And that includes the very strong focus on bioenergy in the IRA. Now, from watching Golden State Natural Resources really closely, one of the interesting dynamics we've spotted in people who are attentive to climate finance dynamics and climate finance campaigns will recognize this name of Barclays Bank. GSNR has identified Barclays as their investment banker, which is really convenient for Biofuel Watch because we already have a campaign around Barclays because of Barclays' very deep involvement with Drax. And the bottom photo is of the Drax power station in Yorkshire. And this is one of the more notorious power plants in the world that has converted from coal and that is just soaking up tremendous amounts of forest from all around the world, from British Columbia, but also from the Southeast United States, which is one of the bioregions that has been most adversely impacted by the explosion in the wood pellet industry and this global trend of converting coal-powered power plants to burning biomass. So I share this photo with you of an Inviva power plant in North Carolina, just so folks get an idea for the type of industry that's being proposed for California. Biofuel Watch is also working really closely with partners in Chile. There's an NG power plant in Antofagasta, a 320 megawatt coal-powered power plant that's being converted to biomass, which we clearly see as being a false solution. And just kind of wanted to point out for folks, the facts of the climate damage from burning biomass, not as a reason to continue burning fossil fuels, but to really drive home the fact that converting fossil fuel infrastructure to bioenergy infrastructure is not a climate solution. In this instance, we see that burning biomass releases more carbon per unit of energy than does even burning coal. Really quickly to wrap up my section of the presentation before I hand it off to Shay is we are really concerned about the environmental justice implications of this project proposal. Oftentimes we think of environmental justice in an urban sense, but I've done some real research, especially drawing from the state's own documents about the actual realities of working in the woods in the state of California. And this actually can be extrapolated to many Western states, but this is specific to California. So everything that I share here is drawn from the UC Berkeley and California Department of Workforce Development study from 2020 about putting California on the high road. And I think many people are familiar with this, but Chapter 7 is something that hasn't gotten that much attention. And basically, the state even says for itself that by investing more in what's called natural and working lands, which is just an umbrella for all forest intervention work, that we could simply be increasing the number of poverty level jobs. So it's very, very, very dangerous work. And increasingly over time, migrant workers have filled more and more roles working in the woods. And what we find is that these communities of workers are facing really extreme social marginalization and very low job quality. So it's pretty clear that the number of people who are actually working in the woods on all of these kinds of jobs, they call it like vegetation management, commercial thinning, wildfire prevention. There's so many different words, but basically this is really labor intensive work. But again, there's a growing body of evidence that it's migrant workers that are doing the majority of these jobs on public and private lands. We may not even know really how many people are doing this work because of the nature of the contracting that's done. And then also really disturbing is the evidence that so many instances the workers have really been denied their rights. So I just want to share this because the proponents of Golden State Natural Resources wood pellet scheme have been making a lot of statements about how important it is to create jobs. And we 100% agree, but these need to be jobs that are safe that have a future and that guarantee people's rights. So I covered a couple of items in this presentation, looking a little bit at the nuts and bolts of Golden State Natural Resources and touching a little bit on some of the environmental justice concerns. But I'm now going to go ahead and turn it over to Shay, as she's got a number of slides as well to complement what I've already shared right there.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks so much for that great overview. And thank you, Janet. And thank you so much, Sunflower Alliance, and to everyone who came out on Super Bowl Sunday to hear about the wood pellet industry. And I say that as the granddaughter of someone who played for the Chicago Bears and Philadelphia Eagles. So thanks, everybody. So I'm going to cover the threats from the proposed Golden State Natural Resources wood pellet project, because so we understand what's at stake with this proposed project. And as Gary said, this project is proposing to construct 2 of the largest wood pellet production facilities in the country. So equal in size to those big Enviva wood pellet facilities that are really devastating the southeastern United States. Huge consequences. 1 million, proposed 1 million metric tons of pellet production per year in an industry that reported most recently that they produce 11 million tons nationwide, 1 million. So that's huge. This project was huge. So I wanted to touch on the climate harms, public health harms, public safety harms, environmental justice harms, and harms to our forests from this proposed project. So in terms of, also I realized just to remind you of who I am, I'm Shay Wolf, and I put it in the chat. I'm the climate science director with the Center for Biological Diversity. I know Janet already gave me an introduction, but so in terms of starting with climate harms, I wanted to go through the different stages of this project and how greenhouse gases and other pollutants are released at every step of the project. And first, with logging forests, this project proposes to log within a 100-mile radius of each wood pellet factory. So that's a huge amount of forest that can be logged, releasing carbon, through the cutting of those forests and the heavy machinery that's involved. Then those cut trees need to be trucked, often long distances to those wood pellet production facilities. And they are estimating 285 daily truckloads coming into those facilities, 285 each day, these big trucks. So all of the noise and, of course, the greenhouse gas pollution, the diesel pollution that comes from those big trucks. Then there's pollution that's coming from making the pellets at those wood pellet production facilities. So that means chipping the trees, drying the trees, pressing that material into pellets. That's very, energy intensive and releases a lot of carbon and other carbon pollution and other pollution. And another facet of that is when those wood chip piles are sitting there waiting to be made into pellets, they release methane, a super pollutant. Then this project will build some rail spurs and connect to rail lines and transport all of those wood pellets across the state. So there's pollution from that kind of rail transport. They will store the pellets at ports in Richmond or Stockton, as Gary mentioned. Once again, those stored pellets at the ports can release methane. And then those will be loaded onto these mega ships and shipped where they're saying either to Asia, probably Japan or South Korea, or even to the EU. So long distance shipping of those pellets, and then the pellets get burned in converted coal-fired power plants in those other countries, releasing so much carbon pollution. So just, you can see, like at every stage, just a lot of bad for the climate. And I wanted to, there's a lot of industry misinformation from the woody biomass and wood pellet industry, as there is, similar to the fossil fuel industry, in trying to promote their dirty products. And wood biomass energy is very harmful to the climate. And there have been, just hundreds and hundreds of scientists speaking out on this issue for many years now. And so woody biomass is what it's often called, the kind of the cut trees and other forest materials, and that includes the wood pellets. It's currently categorized as a renewable energy source equivalent to like wind and solar, and it's not, because like fossil fuels, when you burn wood, it is a carbon releasing form of energy. So it emits the carbon dioxide and it worsens the climate crisis. And as Gary mentioned, burning wood to generate electricity is more polluting at the smokestack than even coal. Very damaging. So this project would increase greenhouse gas emissions, and then it's cutting forests, so it also decreases at the same time those forest carbon stocks. Forests are a huge important part of the climate solution. Of course, phasing out fossil fuels is key, but also our forests are huge carbon sponges, and we want to keep them standing and keep them productive. We do not want to be cutting them down and releasing all of their stored carbon into the atmosphere. So just another point on the climate impacts of this project is that the biomass industry, the wood pellet industry will say, oh, but it's carbon neutral, and it is definitively not. And how they try and claim that is they'll say, okay, well, we release some stuff when we burn these pellets for electricity, but those trees grow back, and so they will kind of reabsorb the carbon that was released at the smokestack. So they're carbon neutral. But the forest regrowth takes time, and it's really uncertain. There's no guarantee that those cut forests will not be cut again and again, that there's no guarantee they will be allowed to regrow. And it's highly uncertain, so that we don't know if that land will be converted to other uses. And even if forests are allowed to regrow, numerous studies show that there is a net increase of carbon in the atmosphere for decades to centuries. It takes a really long time, even in the most optimistic scenario of forest regrowth for those trees, regrowing trees to reabsorb the amount of carbon that was released into the atmosphere. And then, as I mentioned, cutting those trees for energy just ends their carbon sequestration. They're no longer able, they're no longer there to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, which we need. So this project would worsen carbon pollution at a time, in the near term and the long term, at a time when we have to be cutting emissions by half or more in this decade to, meet the 1.5 degree climate target and avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. And I love this quote. I think this is a quote by Mary Booth at Partnership for Policy Integrity. And it's, the burning forest biomass is a triple hit to the climate. It increases emissions, decreases our forest carbon sink, and soaks up subsidies that could be allocated to zero emission technology or efficiency. Okay. So the next harm that I want to focus on is the harms to public health and our quality of life. And so wood pellet manufacturing and burning releases a whole suite of harmful pollution that harms our health. So that's particulate matter, fine dust, NOx, which is leads to smog, sulfur oxides, carbon monoxide, heavy metals like lead and mercury, hazardous air pollutants. This is another category that often includes carcinogens like benzene, toluene, formaldehyde, dioxins. And all of these pollutants are associated with really serious illnesses: premature death, respiratory disease, heart disease, and increased risk of cancer. So this project would build these two facilities that would produce, have risks of these health harms to surrounding communities. There's that increased truck traffic, that 285 daily truck trips producing noise and diesel pollution, and the increased rail and ship traffic from this project. So a lot of health harms. Also, I wanted to talk about related harms to public safety, to communities and workers from fires and explosions. And those wood chip piles are prone to spontaneous combustion. So just spontaneously, they combusting and setting on fire. And so there have been fires and explosions that have erupted in pellet plants in at least 5 states. These pellet plants have repeated safety violations, air quality violations when you look at the data, and which is not well reported to the public, how bad these things are in terms of repeated violations. And one example, this is the picture that's shown, is in 2017, a wood pellet storage silo in Port Arthur, Texas, caught fire, and flames were, it was burning for more than 100 days. And so it sent many local residents to the hospital. And later that year, a worker at the silo died when pellets fell on the Bobcat machine that he was operating. So this is a dangerous industry. I also wanted to focus on environmental justice harms, so harms to environmental justice communities and workers. And 2 of the deep water ports that have been proposed for storing the wood pellets and then loading the wood pellets on ships to be exported to Asia and the UK or EU are the Port of Stockton and the Levin-Richmond terminal. And these port communities, if you look at Cal EnviroScreen, are flagged as having some of the highest pollution burdens in the state. And I know many of us, folks on this call, work on issues, that are really harming these communities. So these communities have this really high exposure to particulate matter, that we were just talking about, those little particles that can enter the lungs and the bloodstream and create all of those health problems. High rates of asthma, low birth weights, cardiovascular disease. These are low-income communities, and according to Cal EnviroScreen, and majority Hispanic populations. So Richmond, as Gary noted, had this recent victory in phasing out the storage of coal and petcoke. And so for this project to be proposing to then replace that with this really also very dirty and dangerous product is really alarming. One thing I'll also flag is that the wood pellet production facility in Tuolumne County also is of concern and has a higher than average pollution burden, a high poverty rate, and high rates of asthma and cardiovascular disease. And I'll note that in the southeastern United States, where now this is where this dirty industry is concentrated, that wood pellet production facilities are 1.5 times more likely to be built in low-income communities of color. These facilities are disproportionately sited in low-income communities of color, and really harming those communities with all of these problems that we've been discussing. I also wanted to touch on another piece of the industry misinformation and one way that this project is being promoted. And they're saying, okay, well, we need to cut our forest, we need to log or thin, where thinning is a euphemism for logging. Thinning makes it sound like we'll take out a little bit here and a little bit there, a nip and a tuck. But what thinning looks like in practice is taking out a lot from the forest and often taking out really big trees as well. So, but the talking point is that we need to cut our forests, log our forests, because that will help protect us from wildfire. And when you look at the science, it's very clear that logging and thinning is not effective for protecting our communities from wildfire. It's not effective for reducing wildfire intensity or rate of spread, for protecting communities when wildfires hit, and it's certainly not effective for cutting climate heating emissions. So what we do know from practice, from experience, is that community fire safety works, not cutting forests. So what works to protect our communities during wildfire is focusing on the homes and communities themselves, not logging distant forests. So that's home fire safety retrofits. It's protecting people's lungs, like by public money, public funding for those retrofits for air filters to protect from smoke, fire and smoke shelters, defensible space work, which is like any kind of thinning or cutting that you do should be done right around the home, right around the community, not in distant forests. Another thing people will say, well, we have this, tree mortality in the state. First of all, dead trees, there's been lots of studies showing that dead trees do not increase wildfire activity. And when you kind of look at what the level of dead trees that are healthy for forests, there's actually there's not an excess of dead trees in the forest. Dead trees are really important for forest ecosystems. They really provide a lot of food and habitat to forest critters. So the kind of talking point that, oh, the dead trees are more flammable and dangerous does not bear out with the science. And then you'll hear, oh, well, we have to log forests, to prevent them from releasing all these carbon emissions when they burn. But there have been lots of studies now that show that logging and thinning to kind of in the guise of kind of reducing wildfire or forest carbon release, it releases more carbon emissions than it prevents from being released in a wildfire. So these all don't these reasons for this project don't stand up when you kind of look at the science and the evidence on the ground. Instead, cutting forests for biomass energy does a lot of damage to forest ecosystems. It harms habitat for sensitive and endangered species like Pacific fisher, or California spotted owl, or blackback woodpecker. It harms forests that provide all of this kind of resilience, all these services for us in terms of climate change resilience. They provide erosion control and flood control and clean air and clean water. And so logging harms that, and it reduces forest carbon storage. And as we mentioned, this project is proposing to remove trees of any type and size within a 100-mile radius of each pellet facility. So that's a huge area that touches on 18 national forests, our public lands, our lands. It incentivizes increases in logging. So those pellet facilities have to get fed. They're proposing to produce huge amounts of pellets, 1 million metric tons a year. They have to get fed. And so it's going to incentivize an increase in logging. And these facilities would be located near some of our very treasured places in the state: Yosemite National Park and Lake Tahoe, Lassen National Park, Mount Shasta, so many places. And in the southeastern United States, activists there will point out that they've lost 1 million acres of forest due to the wood pellet biomass production there. And let's not let that happen in California. And this is a view, that picture is a view of the Enviva wood pellet companies clear cutting there in the southeastern United States. So I guess I wanted to just kind of point us to the next kind of area of discussion is, now that we kind of shared information, is next steps in stopping this wood pellet project. And so, as Gary mentioned, during the scoping phase for this project under CEQA, we submitted comment letters, and is about 33 groups from national to regional to local, including Sunflower Alliance. Thank you so much, Sunflower Alliance, for signing on to this very powerful letter opposing this project. The next step is that Golden State Natural Resources will put out a draft environmental impact report, and that gives us the opportunity to comment and put in legal comments as well to push back on this project, setting up for a legal challenge. And there's also a really important opportunity to organize interested groups. So we'd love to, open up a discussion to, for questions, but especially to get your ideas, any ideas you might have for fighting this project, and interested organizations who might have capacity to help with this. So here's my contact. Once again, I'm Shay Wolf, Climate Science Director at Center for Biological Diversity, and there's my email, and there's Gary's email as well, and also Sunflower Alliance. You could reach out to any of us as well if you want to discuss this further, have any questions. So I will end there. Thank you, everybody.
You're muted, Janet.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to say thank you to Gary and Shay for a great presentations, both of you. So we will start by entertaining questions. Who who has a question here? Margaret.
So I'm unmuted now. My question is, how do we get the concept that this is wasn't sustainable? What was the word? Renewable. How do we get the characterization of wood pellets as renewable removed? Who's characterized it that way, and how do we undo that?
Well, I could speak to at the state level. So under our renewable portfolio standard that got established in 2002, that at that time, the state lumped in biomass energy as renewable along with wind and solar, because they kind of set, when they were setting that standard, there were existing biomass plants, and they were like, well, we're kind of being told that this is clean and green, and this is an easy way for us to meet that standard, to meet the first target that they had. And so it got ushered in at that time a couple decades ago. And the science then, but the science now, has only strengthened to show, in fact, how dirty it is and should not be put on the same footing as solar and wind energy. So I think that, our group and others have been considering how we could, try and, perhaps it would be through legislation or other means, try and get that biomass energy, and also factory farm gas is in that same category, also very damaging to the climate and communities and public health, to get those excluded from the RPS. It's a really good question. It's kind of it's going to take some work. And then there's issues on the federal side too, and kind of doing the same.
I think it's a great question, Margaret, and just really quickly to say that Biofuel Watch and many other partners are trying to address this situation in the European Union as well, where the Renewable Energy Directive, unfortunately, does continue to characterize a lot of woody biomass as renewable, though they've started to put more restrictions on it. I think we just need to keep raising our voice about these concerns, and when tactical moments appear to try to move the needle in policy, we need to jump on it. But a lot of it does have to do with greater consciousness about the fact that bioenergy is not a renewable option.
Thank you. That's a great question. Maureen. Maureen had her hand up. Still want to speak?
I'm on mute. I'm on mute. Sorry about that. Rookie again. Anyway, so I have actually 3 questions, but one has to do with the Golden State Finance Authority. You mentioned that entity, and I'm curious about that. You said it was supported by 40 rural counties, and you suggested they were the lead agency. Is that odd? I mean, typically when you're going through that kind of money through the state, you're a special district. So is it the forest district, is special district? I'm curious about the financing of that particular entity, the Golden State Finance Authority. And then if you don't mind, I'm just going to lay the 3 questions on you. One was cutting forest for pellets or versus using dead wood. I'm curious about that. I'm looking at that photo of dogwood that was totally clear cut. It looks like it's not just dead wood, it's every kind of wood available. So how are they doing that in California? And the other third statement is, I think, can't remember who said it, but it says dead trees do not increase wildlife activities. Really?
Well,
Wildfire.
Confirm that for me, or did I get that wrong?
Yeah, let me take a stab at these questions, and then I'll pass the baton to Shay. In particular, the last question about some of the controversy about standing dead trees, and whether they actually increase wildfire intensity or not. The first thing is, I think your questions, Maureen, about Golden State Finance Authority are really important, and we need to keep asking these questions. So Golden State Finance Authority is actually a joint powers authority. So they have a particular legal sort of framework that allows them to advance projects that would be multi-jurisdictional projects. So for instance, for housing projects, you can imagine how useful it could be to be able to get county, municipal, and even state jurisdiction, kind of all on the same page. Same with transportation projects. We contend, however, that what's being proposed with Golden State Natural Resources is a totally different situation because of the implications of sort of the reverberation effect, the ripple effect of any sort of impacts that Golden State Natural Resources might have. The other governance thing that we're pointing out is there is a direct conflict of interest, for instance, in that there are members of the board of Golden State Finance Authority who have been assigned to be members of the board of Golden State Natural Resources. So they're already kind of in bed together as project proponents. Yet at the same time, Golden State Finance Authority has attempted to fill the role here as the lead agency, which ostensibly should be an impartial, neutral jurisdiction with the capacity to really oversee the review of a project like this, which would include the governance and any appeal process in the long run. And how this would all work remains a point of real contention. And I think we need to keep our eyes on it. And I think the rural county representatives of California is an entity that merits more scrutiny now as well. So with that, then I thought I would pass the baton, however, to Shay for addressing the questions about basically this narrative that tree mortality lends itself directly to more intense wildfire, though, because we're seeing the evidence that actually a dead standing tree is not like some sort of matchstick on the landscape, as we've been told again and again by the Forest Service. Shay, do you want to help debunk that myth a little bit?
Yeah. So that is a common talking point that we have more dead standing trees or fallen to on the landscape because of fire, bark beetles, and drought, and that those are increased fire intensity, so we need to log those and take those out. And there have been several really large scale studies that have looked at this question and found that is not correct, that does not bear out under the evidence, that having the those dead trees do not increase wildfire intensity or rate of spread. And instead, I think what we had talked about was the questioner had talked about is that those dead trees are these really important, provide really important habitat for wildlife. They're also important for carbon storage. For wildlife, when a fire or other kind of event comes through that increases the amount of dead trees on the landscape, that bark, there's native bark beetles come in, they colonize that area. They're really important food sources for all kinds of birds and other animals. And there is this the kind of natural forest regeneration that happens, that where the trees are, those dead trees are really important for that. And another kind of myth is that that those dead standing trees don't really hold a lot of carbon, that a lot of when a fire comes through, the carbon is released into the atmosphere. But there have been several studies lately that show that even in a high intensity fire, very little of the carbon stored in trees goes into the atmosphere. It's like less than a few percent actually of the carbon. Most of the carbon that goes into the atmosphere is the burning of the litter and the leaves. But those dead standing trees are really important for carbon storage and for wildlife habitat. And that there are still, when you look at what kind of level, like healthy levels of dead standing trees in the forest are, that we're not exceeding that. We actually maybe even have in some places fewer of those than we would if we, there had not been so in areas where people had not kind of suppressed fire and suppressed kind of the creation of those trees, those snag forests. But then just really quickly, there was also the question about do they use, are they just using, how can they kind of do clear cutting or use whole trees? And so just one other thing is that the biomass, wood pellet industry will say we're just using kind of waste, or, waste. Well, they'll say we're just using tree tops or limbs or, branches type of thing. And when that has been investigated in the southeastern United States, activist groups there have been very good investigative journalists in uncovering that no, they're actually taking the whole tree and converting it to biomass. It's much more economic, cost effective for them to do that rather than taking what they would call the scraps. And that it's true of this project in California, that they're proposing, when you look at the language, that they'll say, oh, we're just going to take the scraps, but no, they're actually going to take whole trees as well under this proposal. And I don't know if, Gary, you wanted to jump in on that as well.
I would just really quickly add for everyone to remember, and this is what the wood pellet manufacturing interests don't really tell people, but to have the density of a wood pellet that captures the amount of energy that they want to capture, you end up having to use roundwood. You can't just do that from using the branches and needles and the little bit of scrap that's left over from logging. They need to use the real body of the tree, the real whole trunk roundwood of the tree, so that the wood pellet itself will actually have the density that it needs to have to be any use for burning. Anyone who's done a campfire knows the difference between burning a branch with a couple of needles on it and burning a good chunky piece of wood. It's the same thing for the wood pellets. So when they tell you they're just using scraps, it's basically a lie.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. Lisa, go ahead.
This is a hypothetical question here, but what would happen if both Stockton and Richmond said, hey, we're not going to export any wood pellets? Would that kind of put an end to the project if they said that sort of proactively?
It would certainly be a way of sending a real signal that California as a state is not on board with this. So we think that organizing at that level is really important for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is it could be very effective for putting a real wrench in this scheme.
I wanted to add here that Stockton is letting its coal contracts, its contract to ship coal, run out because they anticipate greater agricultural shipments, but they are also there's no organized effort there against wood pellets. So this is this is again one of our challenges here. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I wanted to say, first of all, thank you for this excellent presentation. And if there's any sort of interface with organized labor on this, I'd like to help with that, and I'll put my email in the chat. One question that I think is inevitably going to come up is, what's the alternative economically for both the Levine terminal and the northeastern part of California? And I want to, I absolutely agree that this needs to be opposed, but one of the concerns I have is, that's one of the most economically depressed, although it's also one of the least populated parts of the state of California. It's also one of the places where the strongest support for the so-called Jefferson State movement is, which is basically a neo-fascist separatist movement. And I think one of the reasons why that movement is so strong there is that has hereto been a very resource extraction dependent economy. So what do we do to come up with an alternative that isn't destructive and makes these communities whole such as they are?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And you know, one answer is that to gear those communities toward doing that home hardening work, the community kind of fire safety work. Because when, as Gary mentioned, I mean, the kind of forest extraction work is dangerous, you know, it's, you know, often, you know, low paid because, and it's like, it's been mechanized. So, you know, in terms of job creation too, it's a lot of it is just mechanized and machines do the work. And in terms of, you know, the home hardening, like the home safety retrofits, if we could put public funding in, instead of putting it into cutting our forests, which we're doing now at the state and federal level, which doesn't make sense, you know, from so many perspectives, why don't we put it into doing the thing that we know is most effective for protecting communities during wildfire, and that is the, you know, the home safety retrofits and the defensible space work. And you know, there was a report that by an economics group that looked at the benefits of that and found that in terms of pay and job creation, that would do a lot more for those communities than the forest, the logging work. So that's one answer that I think would be, you know, help everybody instead of, you know, being harmful. So
I think your questions are, as always, really important, Steve. And, you know, these are dilemmas that we've been wrestling with for decades. And I think we want to continue to get in there, and just imagining that there is an alternative is really important at this level. And I appreciate what you say, Shay, because I think there is public money that could be redirected and to, you know, pursue an economic development that's equitable and not necessarily just trying to set things up so that certain wealthy interests continue to benefit from the status quo. Those are really good questions, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Janice, go ahead.
Finally, I'm going nuts here. Thank you. This is an amazing presentation. I really appreciate it. And I'm sick here with the even thought of this project happening. I've been doing some volunteer work with the band clear cutting group for the Sierra Club. So I have many things that are terrible about this as an idea just because of the decimation of our forests. First of all, we have the 30 by 30. We're supposed to be able to preserve 30% of our land, you know, by 2030 as part of our whole climate plan. I mean, it's illegal. I don't know who this land belongs to. The other thing is that once a forest fire has occurred, it turns out that that's a very fertile part of the cycle. Actually, it's when the most fertile parts of the forest, because that's when new organisms. First of all, there's a lot of then dead wood on the ground, which should not be taken away. It's very bad to do this post-fire logging because it's you know, thousands of little organisms are living in those logs down there, and there's also whole species that are dependent on fire. That's why, over the scheme of things, some of them go to areas where a fire just occurred, and they make holes in the trees that other species can use to improve, you know, to do that. Anytime you're cutting down this kind of stuff, or particularly taking out the dead stuff, which is what they would want to do with the chips, is preventing the next species from evolving. The other thing is, in England now, there's a new thing going on that's called rewilding, which is where people are trying to, in their homes and neighborhoods and, you know, local areas, bring them back to be rewild again. And here, what's happening in the US in the cities is a lot of people getting involved in native plants. And what they're discovering is that little organisms, little things that we all depend on, evolved over thousands of years to eat this particular plant or this particular food, or, you know, to evolve in this area or to be associated with these particular species. When you take down the trees, you're decimating the entire ecosystem of it. Just about nothing is left, including the insects under the ground and the fish and everything. And right now we've got like a third of our species on the planet have become extinct. This is really a big, big deal. The other thing is that there's no guarantee that once the trees have been cut down that they would grow back again. I mean, they grew in an environment where there are other trees around them, and it would be hotter. We might not ever get those trees back again. It's basically making that whole area a desert, possibly. And this is way, way, way bigger than, you know, a source of energy. It's anyway, do you want me to rant some more? I mean, we wouldn't have the waters in the creeks. We wouldn't have the water coming down to you know, to the bay. The atmosphere is not, you know, oxygen is being taken in, I mean, all the time being given off by all these trees. So that's going to increase the actual rate of the climate getting warmer. Do I sound like a fanatic? Because I really feel fanatical about it. Anyway, I think this
No,
is.
you're great. You're great.
Well, I'll quit at that.
Yeah. No, Janice, I think that's great. And you hit on so many important points. And, you know, all the beauty of our forest ecosystems and the biodiversity they support and what they provide. And I think that, you know, sometimes I think people forget, you know, that, or need to be reminded that wildfire is this very natural and essential like part of our forest ecosystem. They evolved with it for millions of years. And when you look at historical wildfire amounts and even amounts that are happening now as wildfire, you know, kind of amount has ticked up with the hotter and drier conditions, the amount of wildfire in Western forests, in most Western forests, is still less than it was historically prior to fire suppression. And it does so much. It's like it's the phoenix, you know, it creates this, you know, this mosaic, this heterogeneity in the forest of these different kind of patches, you know, kind of resets the forest in that area and provides those snag forests. Are called those places where high severity fire has created a lot of dead trees are called snag forests. That those are some of the most biodiverse habitat in the forest, you know, supporting so many species and so many species that like you said, are fire dependent. And as Gary's comment said in the chat, post-fire salvage logging, going in and clear cutting those areas after fire is so incredibly destructive. When people like Forest Service officials will sometimes say when a fire comes through, it becomes a moonscape. That is not true. The trees are standing, you know, there's patches of live and dead trees. And it's this diverse habitat. What creates the moonscape is the logging that comes in after that and clear cuts the area and turns it, just decimates the area, you know, churns up the soil, takes out all of that habitat. And what has been very frustrating and disturbing to me is that I have visited some of those areas that the Forest Service or CAL FIRE will claim after high severity fire are these biological deserts and nothing is growing back. And when I have walked through them, for instance, some of the highest severity fire patches in the rim fire, for example, there's regeneration everywhere, conifers everywhere, birds everywhere, you know, life everywhere. Those forests are coming back on their own. They do not need to be logged and replanted and become tree plantations. It's very devastating to the forest and to the climate. So I really appreciate your comments.
Well, the other thing is that was mentioned only briefly is there's really not very much employment in the logging industry up in those areas because they use these giant machines that just sweep it. That's why it looks so awful after they've logged an area. It's not just that a tree has been disappeared, but it treks through the whole thing so that the whole territory is not going to ever, you know, graze again, or in some cases it would take many, many years, and the forest gives it its best shot. It's just, and it's against the whole principle that we have. I mean, I almost think we should have fences around our forests or something, just so that no one can get in and do this kind of stuff. I'll volunteer to be one of those people.
Thank you, Janet.
Build a wall.
Build a wall.
So
David,
anyway,
David has had his hand up.
I've ever heard sitting on any kind of Sunflower Alliance thing, I must admit, or anything. This is just horrible. We really need to marshal our forces. And how about the 30 by 30 group? Bring those people in. Anyway, I'll stop.
Thank you. Thank you, Janice. David has had his hand up forever.
No,
Please.
that's okay. As someone and several of us here were involved in the No Coal in Oakland effort, which was supposed to be a bulk oversized Oakland bulk and oversized terminal. Well, I heard you talking about, Stockton and Richmond. As you folks have been following this, have you heard any mention of, possibly using the Oakland terminal for it? Not that the terminal exists or will ever will exist.
That's a great question, David. I'll defer to Gary.
I see Gary shaking his head.
Yeah, no, I've not heard anything about that bulk terminal space in Oakland. Right now, really, it looks like the Levine terminal is the one that's being most coveted by Golden State Natural Resources. And I would suggest that that's probably where Golden State Natural Resources has already had some success making political inroads for their project. But there's still a lot of space for us to organize and raise the alarm about this.
Well, you'll keep an ear out and an eye out for us, though, on that matter.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure, David. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Margaret.
Yeah, I don't think the Oakland terminal is that appealing because it doesn't exist. I just actually visited with Miss Margaret Gordon, who's in rehab recovering from knee surgery, and she didn't know anything about wood pellets. So we're going to get the word out to our no-coal folks just to be aware. But I mean, they'd have to go through the whole construction project, with all of our opposition. So I'm not going to lose sleep over that. I'm going to lose sleep over the little bugs that have nowhere to live when the trees die. I'm not die when the trees are chopped away.
Thank you, Margaret. I just wanted to add, I'll go to you, Susan, in just a second. I wanted to add a technical note here that what makes the Richmond port so attractive is that the Stockton port is the river there, is more shallow. And so with coal, they had to load the ships only partially and then bring them to Richmond and bring the coal in by rail and then finish loading those ships. And so I imagine that's why Richmond is more attractive. Gary, you said that they had political inroads. I think we are we're at a place with our city council that once they get the full scope on this project, that they may, as a body, oppose it. We can keep our fingers crossed. And I'll go to you, Susan, and then I'll come back to an idea. We are going to close at 5:30, and we want to talk about organizing strategies before we go. So I will go to Susan.
Hi, I'm glad to hear that people are going to be working on organizing, and I put in the chat that I hope that young people will be part of that. When we were doing no coal in Richmond, one of the things that really upset me was the fact that the tradespeople showed up, hundreds of them, and here we were, a bunch of little old people, and they were really intimidating. What I've heard in this, I appreciate this presentation. Thank you so much. And one of the things that I heard was that there are not that many jobs involved. I'm hoping that continues to be part of the discussion, because in case people say, look, you know, here are these wonderful jobs for us and you don't want us to work. I'm sick and tired of hearing that, particularly when there aren't a lot of jobs, but it can't be about jobs, particularly when there aren't a lot of jobs. So let's keep that at some point in the discussion, I think. That's about it.
Thank you. It does have to be part of the discussion because it's always going to be used. And I'll go to Steve, and then if folks could hold their questions while we talk a little bit about organizing strategies. Go ahead, Steve, if it's really quick.
Yeah, I mean, to answer that last point is, I mean, if the employers see that as a way to try and maintain their profit motive, of course they're going to do that. It's a very old playbook, and there are ways to defeat it. But that's a discussion that maybe could be had offline. So look for my email in the chat, and we can talk about that.
Cool. Thank you, Steve. So I will go back to something that I mentioned briefly before, just a few minutes ago, that we do have a city council in Richmond that might be predisposed to opposing this project, because not sure if it'd have to go through the planning commission and to the city council. I mean, this is something that we need to investigate. But in any case, I hope that we can do a study session with the city council next month, at the end of the month, to inform them on and do a wood pellets 101, just similar to what we've done here tonight, only lots shorter, of course. So I'll open it up to organizing thoughts, and maybe Gary, if you wanted to give us a brief idea of next steps and what you might be looking for here.
Well, I mean, certainly part of the outcome for, you know, bringing everyone together here was to have a bit of a brainstorm, and that we're both on a kind of a tight timeline, but we also have a little bit of breathing room for the moment, in that we're still waiting for the draft environmental impact report to be released. Of course, there'll be lots of organizing to be done around that, but in the meantime, you know, creating new opportunities to work on this. So we really wanted to put some information on the table and see how people responded, because we didn't come to this meeting necessarily with a roadmap of organizing that needs to be done. We're definitely open to hearing and would like to see how the local community grabs onto this and takes initiative and tries to you know, change course on this. So anything that people have to share would be very interesting.
Thank you, Jean.
You're on mute, Jean.
I'm sorry. I wanted to ask Shay and Gary if either of your organizations has been in touch with any environmental groups in the local areas where these wood pellet plants are proposed to be built. There might be some local environmental activists or environmental justice activists that we could hook up with that might make a more powerful, I mean, it would be, you know, it would look nice.
Is one of the counties, Gary, is one of the counties Butte County?
Lassen County, actually.
Yeah, it's in Lassen, but the that radius, or rather the circle around it, is Butte County included up there?
Yes, Butte, Modoc, Siskiyou County. It's a pretty broad area. And in terms of like environmental justice partners up in the northeast part of the state, we don't have as many, but we do have colleagues, friends, partners who have been very deeply involved with forest watch activities for decades. So we already have our fingers on the pulse, as it were, for some of the big Forest Service projects that are at play up there. And of course, many of us have been tracking companies like Sierra Pacific Industries for a long time. So there is a forest defense community to bring to bear on this. but we believe, and this is what Shay was touching on, we believe, and also just from our own experience working with partners, that Tuolumne County has a much stronger demographic of EJ people in the rural community than Lassen. I don't know, Shay, if you have anything more that you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Gary. And in terms of environmental justice partners, some groups that signed on to our letter and are aware of, the project and, in that initial phase of opposing it were Central California Environmental Justice Network and CVAC, Central Valley Air Quality Coalition, and we're reaching out to other partners regarding like the Stockton area, like Little Manila Rising and CDE. We are trying to get in, reach out to lots of different groups at the local kind of and regional levels that come to this issue from different concerns and perspectives. The environmental justice groups focus on environmental justice, and as Gary mentioned, forest watch groups, climate groups, trying to have a broad network of folks. And so we are doing that outreach now, and really appreciate though, any suggestions from folks here about outreach, or we really want your ideas about organizing an outreach.
I mentioned Butte because there is a 350 Butte, and there may be other groups up there. Margaret, and then Maureen.
So in terms of groups to outreach to, several of us on this call are delegates or representatives to the California Environmental Justice Coalition. A number of the groups that you mentioned are in that coalition, and there may be others that you didn't mention that need to know about this. So we need to get the word out to them. Also, there's a group in Weed in Siskiyou County that stopped Crystal Geyser from stealing their water. I just sent out a thing from them recently, an anti-war statement, but I went to elementary school with one of their leaders. And so again, that's a group that we could send the word to that has already been organized around, different, but not that different. So what would be great is to have, a 5-sentence paragraph or 10-sentence paragraph that I could share with the people in Weed, and that we can share with the mailing list for the CEJC. Because we can talk about it at a meeting, but not that many groups come to the meetings, and I don't know how many of them read the minutes. If we put it out on the email, it will get to everybody. So that would be great to have, and it can go to those folks.
Terrific, Margaret. We did spend a bit of time on the last CEJC meeting on this. Maureen, and then Lisa.
Oh, there we go. Unmute. That it. I'm just, my question is sort of focused on the Levin terminal. And what are the options for that facility and the city council or whoever? I mean, honestly, it is a serious deep water port, and it wants to have a function. And I am so proud. I went door to door and said no coal in Richmond, and that happened. But that said, what is their future? I mean, okay, no wood pellets, and we know they don't cover nothing, and it's a explosion waiting to happen. Wood pellets obviously are a bad choice for that facility. What is the future for that facility?
I can take this one. There was a study done, and I'm happy to share it with you, Maureen. Claire Brown and one other person did an economic study of the possibility of other bulk commodities. And so I will share that with you. It's my feeling is that it's not our job. It is not our job to say, okay, here's what you need to do.
Be smart about the economics, and
Yeah.
you're totally right on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Claire Brown she's an economist at Cal. I mean, she looked into this. So if folks want that study, I'm happy to share it with you.
Thank
Lisa?
you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for bringing it up. Lisa, go ahead.
Just wanted to say that I live in Richmond. I was on No Coal in Richmond, and I'm in the West Contra Costa County group of the Sierra Club. And we have, a little bit of funds. So if there was some kind of organizing that we wanted to do around the Lassen terminal, and it costs some money, the Sierra Club, I mean, I can't, unilaterally offer it up, but just saying that their money doesn't need to be a problem, I don't think.
Always good to know. Thank you so much. And we really appreciated your work on No Coal, and Susan's, and Maureen's, and Margaret's. A lot of people here worked on the No Coal project. Susan.
So will we get an email with a statement that we can share with the other groups that we have involvement with? And also, could those of us who live in Richmond be, if it's going to be in a city council meeting, since I don't look at all the agendas, could we get an email telling us to be at those meetings if we can be, to, to speak up? Is there sufficient outreach on your part to let us, give us stuff to work with like that?
I think this is going to have to be done through Sunflower Alliance. There are a number of people on this. Well, let's put it this way, 48 people registered. There are now 24 participants. If you will check in with Sunflower Alliance, we are going to be one of the organizing hubs, obviously. And send me an email, and I'll send you if you are interested, send an email, and I'll put it in the chat, action@sunfloweralliance.org. That's the best way to stay in touch with this organizing effort. Thank you. Jean?
Just a little advertising. If there is an effort to direct it at the Richmond City Council, I'm sure that it'll be in the weekly announcements. So look every Monday morning for your Sunflower Alliance weekly announcements, and you'll know what's going on.
It's the best one-stop shop for climate news in Northern California. It's the Sunflower Alliance newsletter.
Thank you both. Thank you, Gary. And also, is there anyone else who has a comment or a question before we wrap it up here?
Hi, my name is Deb Rolfs. I'm just a citizen of Richmond, and heard you on KPFA the other day. My son works with one of the city council members, and I'll be sending the KPFA link to the interview that you did to Doria Robinson.
Awesome.
My son works for her, so he's going to be working with her and talking to her about this next week.
Beautiful, beautiful. That's very helpful. And like I said, we're gonna try and get on the Richmond City Council agenda for the last meeting in March, which is like the fourth Tuesday. So stay tuned. But thank you, Deb, and thank you for coming to this webinar. Margaret?
So can Gary or Shay write up a very short summary that we can be sending out to people across the state?
Yeah, I'm happy to work on that.
Thanks, Shay. Thank you. It doesn't have to be long,
Yeah, I know. Shorter.
It could have links, but just to give people an overview. Thanks. Thank you so much.
No, absolutely. No, thank you to you too.
Excellent organizing call, Margaret. Last chance before we cut off the recording. I want to thank you all for coming. As huge thanks to Gary and Shay for running it down for us, for organizing this webinar, working on it as hard as you do. We are in your debt, and we can beat this thing. Thank you again.
Thank you. Be
Thank
safe
you.
out there.
Thank you so much,
Take care.
everybody.
Ciao.